Hi, and welcome to the fourth lesson of the series How to Create in 72 Hours a Serious Game That Hits the Mark. The topic of this lesson is the curse of knowledge. In this lesson, I talk about the method used to create the cards, the tools used in order to balance them, the difficulties found, and the tips and tricks to be very efficient in your design sheets. The second subject is how to display information in a graph, so I will explain how we manage the difficulties, what is the use plugin, and why we created a custom chart. The third subject is why it's important asking for feedback, a very subtle thing that a lot of people don't do at the jams, and this is why very often the game doesn't communicate the expected experience. The last subject is how we designed the tutorial, explaining all the reasoning process behind it and showing to you step by step. The card design creation was the most difficult and time-consuming part of the game. We died during this part, so let me explain why it's very important to have a strong design method, and most importantly, I will explain to you how we solve all the problems we faced. The first thing I want to talk about is the top-down approach that we used to create the cards. We started with a very macro vision. We created a list with some meaningful examples of what really our stats mean. So we have found the boundaries of the moods and the feelings generated by our stats. As you can see, the list is very simple and minimal because it must be clear for every team member. We described for each stat some situation for when it's at lower and maximum level. Under our 4 stats, there is another stat, the faith. This is a little Easter egg of the design process because we started with the faith and not with the culture, but we decided to keep the culture because it offers a lot of different scenarios, including the faith-based ones. So this step is very useful to understand what your stats really mean and what kind of feelings they generate. After the first list, we went deep into the combo between stats. So we created some matrices, one for the good combos, so for when stats combine in a positive way, and a matrix for the bad combos. This step helped a lot because we explored different scenarios and we used keywords to keep everything clear and very simple to understand. A lot of times during the card creation I jumped on this sheet to see the combos and think about some cards that represent these combos. It saves you a lot of time because these keywords are like macro areas that you can explore with your cards. These 2 steps were at a high level, so as you can understand, you cannot create directly the cards without exploring and understanding your game opportunities and constraints. Your game is made by rules, so you have to understand them very well, and only exploring the different meanings you can know what is good or bad for your game. Another step that we made before creating the cards was to create the card pillars. These pillars are some rules, constraints that you write in order to keep the cards consistent and to facilitate yourself creating the cards, maintaining your game experience. We created a very basic list of pillars. The first one is coherent with the topic, so the coronavirus. So the cards have to put the player in front of meaningful choices based on the coronavirus situation. The second is meaningful, so the card choices must be interesting and have to teach something to the player. The third is cards are credible characters, so the player has to perceive the cards as real people with which to interact. So the cards must communicate correctly the information, creating a coherent experience that generates a suspension of disbelief. The next one is not trivial, so avoid the feeling of this card is obvious. The next one is the Tau design, so in a good choice there is something bad and vice versa. The last one is coherent stats feedback. The stats must change in a coherent way after a choice made by the player, otherwise he feels the game as unfair and unpredictable. Okay, now I can talk about our card sheet. We have a card sheet divided by language. The first one is the English and the second one is the Italian. The sheets are the same except for the language. In this example, we analyze the English version. We have a very simple structure. In the columns, we have the name, the request, that is the message that appears above the card, the gender, the age, and the job. We have the decision 1 answer, so the text that is displayed on the card when the player swipes at left. We have the decision 1 mindset, so how much the mindset is affected by the decision 1, in this case 0, and it's the same for the other stats. In the culture, as you can see, the value is +7, so the cell is green. The healthcare is -5, so the cell is red. It's very important to visually represent the value, so we have two types of changes. The little ones, so green and red, not so intense, and the big ones, so with more saturated colors. The next column is the decision 1 consequences, so the feedback message that appears when you confirm the decision 1 swiping left. We have some macro areas, the first with the general information, the second with the decision 1, and the third with the decision 2 that has the same columns of the decision 1. We have another name column. This is useful only for our script to associate an image to the card, so this name is not printed in the card because it works only behind the scenes. The card type column is not used in the final game, so we can ignore it. We have also the decision 1 effect, so the sum of all the stats affected by the decision 1. We have the decision 2 effect that is the same as the decision 1 effect, but for the decision 2 stats. We have also the total effect column, so the sum of the decision 1 and the decision 2 stats values. And as the last column we have the total effect normalized, so the total effect of the cards related to the card with the maximum value. So with the normalized value we understand very rapidly how a card affects the game. If it's near to 1, it increases the stats. If it's near to 0, it decreases them. In this part of the sheet we have some additional tables. The first one is used to sum the value of the effects of the decision 1 and the decision 2 because it's very important to keep their value balanced. Otherwise swiping left or right becomes the dominant strategy. So as you can see, the values are balanced. The next table contains the sum of the values of each stats for the decision 1 and the decision 2 with also the total. So we can notice the stats with positive effects like the mindset and the stats with the negative ones like the economy. The columns at the right works in the same way, but they count how many times the stats have been used. The last table is used to keep the values of the changes. As you can see, there are the little changes with the value of 7 and -5. These are the values used in the sheet. Same story for the big changes with the value 14 and -10. This is our sheet structure. It's very simple and it worked well for our needs. The next subject is how we display the information in a graph. Our game uses a graph to show the growth factor curve. It acts like a very clear and intuitive feedback system, but we have never made a graph in a video game, so we face some problems. We have used a plugin called Line Chart to manage the chart in the game. It was very useful because it offers a lot of customizations and it's lightweight, so I recommend it to you. As you can see in the hierarchy, we have the line chart object that is the graph generated by the plugin, but we created also a custom chart to show some graphical indicators, like the line of the axis, the red indicator that shows the value of the daily growth factor, and the object value, in this case 1.3. We created this custom chart because the plugin managed these graphical parts in another way that didn't match our graphical style. We have a lot of settings in the plugin editor because it's very modular. In the datasets field are managed all the values that create our points and lines in the chart. So as you can see, I'm typing some values and the lines appear in the chart. If I turn off our custom chart, we have this situation with the basic behavior of the line chart plugin. As you can see, it didn't manage the axis, the daily indicator, and the objective line. The plugin manages the daily indicator with the same image for all the indicators, but we wanted a different indicator for the actual day, so we were forced to create the custom chart. Our custom chart has this hierarchy. The axis object contains the axis images and the target value line. We have the today indicator, the origin point of the axis, not visible in the game but useful as a reference to calculate where to place the today indicator in the chart. We created an object called custom chart that matches perfectly the line chart created by the plugin. So all the objects inside the custom chart are based on its position and its scale. So in this way we can move the today indicator in the position required. For example, if I type 2 on the x-axis, it goes on the second day of the line chart because our custom chart matches perfectly the size of the line chart. The today indicator is a prefab with two different images inside it. The standard one is red and it's used for when the player is playing. The other image is blue and it's used for when the player wins the game, to keep the color coding consistent and to communicate the success. This is our logic behind the representation of information in our custom chart, breaking the rules of a useful plugin that was not graphically coherent with our style. The next subject is the importance of asking for feedback, because when you are developing a game, you are too immersed in the game and you start to get used to it, so you don't notice problems and inconsistencies. The first thing to do is to listen to others. With others, I mean external people like friends, parents, random people that you use as testers for your game. It's really important to do also in a jam because their feedback literally opens your eyes. It's like a fresh air that brings you ideas and problems to solve. So as soon as you have a playable game that communicates the experience, start to ask for feedback to external people. We started on the second day when we had all the core loop integrated with a graphic that makes the game understandable. We asked for a lot of feedbacks and we listed them in a very basic list. When you receive a lot of different feedbacks, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by them, but you have to behave like a filter. You have to take into consideration only the feedback that really supports your game experience or that sometimes increases the perception of it. We filtered the 90% of the feedbacks, but we kept something. They were fundamental. Without them, Locked would be a terrible game. When you ask for feedback, you have to be ready to change and reiterate your game. In our case, the most important critiques were you don't feel the consequences of your actions, you don't have a tutorial, and you don't empathize with people in the cards. To solve these problems, we spent a lot of time, but we created systems that fix the most important problems. For example, we created a consequences feedback after each choice performed by the player. In this feedback, there is a text that explains the consequences of your choice, relating your choice to real consequences happen when people had act like you. We inserted more narrative in the card text, and we used more expressive and consistent people photos, so the players could feel better the feeling of the people in the cards. And as the last thing, we created a tutorial system that is the last subject of this lesson. So the last subject is how we created a tutorial teaching the mechanics and the objective of the game to the player with a very low effort approach because we had a very little amount of time when we decided to create it. You have to ask yourself some questions in order to have all the information required to create a good tutorial. The first thing is to list all your game mechanics and systems so you have a clear vision of your project. Select the fundamental system that communicate the experience. They are the essential stuff to explain to the player. The second question is why you have to teach these systems. The causes could be very different. For example, a system is a little bit complicated to understand for the mechanics or for a not so good UI because you are in a jam and you don't have too much time to polish the UI, or because it's a brand new system so the player does not have a previous knowledge on that. So when you have highlighted the strongest causes of why you have to teach the selected systems, you could get to the other question, how to teach each system. You could use different types of learning methods. There are many: associative, repetition, instructions. We chose the last method, the instruction one, because it was the most simple to do and our mechanics are not so difficult to explain, so even with an instruction type of tutorial, we avoided wall of text. Before I analyze for you the tutorial of Locked, I want to suggest you some tips and tricks. The first one is to isolate the information. A lot of games put useless information on the screen during the tutorial, creating a lot of perception noise into the player. Be aware to show only the necessary information to make the player learn fast and efficiently. The second tip is to maintain clear and consistent information, like text, keywords, colors, symbols, icons. Everything must be clear. A very useful method is to use the affordance as much as you can. The affordance is the property of an object that communicates how to use it. The last tip is to not treat the player as stupid. So don't explain everything. You have to be good at understanding what are the associations that your player could do and what are the ones that create difficulty, and you have to support them thanks to the tutorial. This is the first screen of the tutorial. We give some messages to the player explaining what kind of actions it's going to make. There is the tutorial button and the skip one because we didn't have time to insert an automatic control that checks if it's the first match of the player or not, so we decided to insert the manual skip button. Pressing the tutorial button, the tutorial starts. We show with a transition the game UI. Then, always with a transition, we cover the useless information. In this way, we show only the situation text. We use a title with a different color and a bigger size as a title, and we use a description that explains what is happening on the screen. As you can see, there is only a part of the game screen not covered, so the player associates that the tutorial is related to this part. We give only one interaction to the player during the tutorial, the continue button. The next phase teaches the choices. We use the transitions as a tool to make the player understand what part of the screen we are explaining. In this case, the card is animated because only the text information was weak, so we have to show the player what kind of interaction he can do with the card. We didn't have time to integrate a free interaction mode in this tutorial phase, so the player cannot interact and the card has only an idle animation. The next phase is the stats. This part is very important because some players didn't understand our stats meaning because some icons were not clear. So listening to their feedback, we added the names of the stats so the players create an association between the icon and the meaning of the stat. The last part of the tutorial is the objective. We show a graph with the winning condition so the player understands what is the expected result and how the game communicates the success. As you can see, the button is changed from continue to start and the color now is white. So we communicate a change to the player, so he perceives this interaction as the last one before the start of the match. This fourth lesson is finished. As you saw, developing a game is really hard because you are so immersed in your product, so it's really important asking for feedbacks as soon as you can. In the next lesson, we are going to talk about the sounds creation, how we created the logo and the name, the marketing strategy that we use for Locked, and we'll make a wrapping up.